Hello, everyone. Welcome to our IT Mythbusters again. This is episode number 6, and we thought we would do it something little differently. So thanks, Mike, for joining today again, and I hope you are doing well. And we were trying to talk, and I had something in my mind to talk about something very interesting that you would love it. Do you want to hear what you want to do? I know that you have come in extempore. I'm going to call you and tell you what's going to happen. Are you
I tell you what, Suresh, it's always fun to have these conversations with you, and I'm excited about what you have in store for me today.
Okay.
Let's hit me with it.
Okay, so I was thinking we should do a little bit of things. It's not just about Mythbusters, but also something that I've been having conversations with large multi-billion-dollar companies to enterprises and seeing the lot of roles that are evolving. So our focus today would be to look at the C-suite roles that engage with technology and digital transformation. There's so many different C-suite roles.
Okay.
So what are some of your C-suite roles that you can think of that is related with technology and digital transformation? And because it has evolved over a period of time, I want to know whether there are real merits on having so many different roles in different companies.
Okay.
And how do they contribute to the overall success of an organization?
Okay.
So let's start with the C-suite roles that you think related with first with technology.
All right. So if we're talking about technology, the role that immediately comes to mind is the Chief Information Officer, or the CIO.
Right. Absolutely.
And I would say, I think most organizations have a CIO. That CIO is, in my experience, largely responsible with the running of the IT organization. They're largely responsible for the infrastructure of the organization, for making sure that IT is providing all of the services to the rest of the business that are needed to keep the business going when it comes to technology services. These may be project management, they may be application development, they may be ongoing system operations, they might be infrastructure management.
Right.
So that's the first role that comes to mind, is that CIO role.
Okay. And do you think also that these CIO roles run IT as a business, or traditionally you see IT still being a more of a cost center in terms of driving?
Because that's a great question. We could spend a whole episode on that topic. I would say I am seeing more and more CIOs that are trying to run IT as a business, but it's not prevalent everywhere yet.
Right. Okay.
I think some of the larger organizations are trying to do that more and more. But I think one of the challenges that you have is, as a CIO, is your job to run IT as a business, or is your job to provide technology to support your actual business?
Right.
And there's a little bit of a challenge in trying to do both.
Correct.
So, and I think that leads us into some of the other roles that we see. So what other roles have you seen when it comes to engaging with technology?
Well, I think I've been a big fan of Chief Innovation Officer, because if you look at a lot of these organizations today, there's two different models, right? One is the exploitation model, where you know for sure that it has been a cash cow, you generate revenue. It's no brainer. We have been doing it for 25 years. Let's keep on doing, right? But then there's a whole lot of segment towards, when you talk about digital transformation, to exploratory phase. They are very strategic initiatives that might make wins in 3 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years down the lane. So there is a kind of an innovation mindset, which is being driven in terms of hackathons, in terms of dojos, in terms of playing around, exploring something like a fail-safe experimentation, exploratory learning, and trying to break or bring in innovation at every walk of life. So there is a whole lot of importance to do and start thinking differently and acting differently. So chief innovation officers have been entrusted to bring in the talent, the best in class, and thinking out of the box and making this an opportunity for everybody to start looking things differently and providing products and services which are much more user-centric, much more not thought of before, and trying to give them a platform for making it a much more enjoyable experience. Have you had a chance?
Well, so I also love chief innovation officers. As you and some of our listeners may know, I'm a chief innovation officer at my company, right? So I work at a company called Expedient, and I'm their chief innovation officer and head of product strategy. And so I love the fact you brought up innovation, the chief innovation officer in this context of technology, because a lot of times organizations don't see the connection between innovation and technology. Right. And while innovation typically in most organizations is about more than just the technology, technology is such an incredible catalyst for innovation that I think it needs to be in this conversation. So I think that's a great one.
The next one, I think we kind of stumble upon many times when it comes in, is the chief digital officer. I know it sounds cliche, but chief digital officer seems to be the most important person who is driving the transformation piece. Is that true in terms of chief digital officer, building a digital enterprise, and it's more focused? And because the role has digital itself, people seem to be falling in love with that term called chief digital officer. So what is your take on that?
So again, another passion area of mine is I think you and a few others may know, I teach digital, all things digital, over at Ohio State here in town. And I think when I think about digital, and when I talk to my students about digital, the way I define it is digital is all about leveraging technology and data to transform business models and customer experiences. Right. Now, that's a pretty specific definition of digital. And what I like to say here, right, is this is a shift, right? We've been doing transformation with technology for 50 years, right? But what we've largely been doing with our transformations has been focusing on the internal operating models of our company. We've been using technology to drive company productivity, to automate the work processes inside our four walls, right? The shift to digital really is about leveraging that technology now outside our company, our interactions with our engagements with our customers, and using the technology to help us transform our actual business models in support of that. And so I love this connection of digital with technology. Digital is more than just technology. It's about understanding the customer journey. It's about really rethinking your underlying business model in support of that. But technology is at the heart of it.
Yeah. So in that point, I just wanted to kind of give it a little retrospective. We used to have this role, and it still exists, as chief technology officer before I go to a chief transformation officer. But chief technology officer as a term has been there for a quite number of years. So it was more technology centric, moving from on-prem to cloud. So would that still remain relevant, Mike, as you started to talk about CDO and how that is coming in? Is that term of CTO fading away and this is getting glorified by CDO? Any thoughts around the CTO towards the CDO transition?
So this is a fascinating conversation, right? What I have seen in my experience is that the chief digital officer tends to be externally facing, customer facing. They tend to be more business oriented and business focused but blending that technology and that business perspective. In a lot of the organizations that I see, the chief technology officer is also focused on externally facing. They're a lot of times focused on the technologies that go into the products that the company sells. Right. So they're not necessarily focused internally on the business of IT. They're focused on technology, but how it is sold to the customers. So, for example, a chief technology officer might have a little bit more focus on, in an insurance world, might have a little bit more focus on a website or a mobile app, or some of the technologies that might go into, say, a telematics solution where you're using technology in the vehicle to actually track where you drive and change your insurance rates as a result of that. That might be something that the chief technology officer might be helping to drive, where the chief information officer might be more focused on the infrastructure to support that, the HR systems, the financial systems, some of the other things that support the running of the business overall. What I have seen, and I'd be curious what you've seen, Suresh, I have seen now startups and smaller organizations tend to lean towards having a CTO first, a chief technology officer first, and then eventually they may grow into having a chief information officer down the road. Sometimes that CTO will report to the CIO. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they'll have both. Sometimes they'll only have one. But typically for organizations that have a CTO, they're not quite as focused, in my experience, on the inner workings of the company. They're focused more on the inner workings of the customer. But they are very, very technology focused versus the chief digital officer, who tends to be more business focused.
Well, that comes on to our next question about, there is another term called chief data officers. So, and is that meaning that we are talking about big data, and people talk about data as the new oil? Is that why people are talking about how to mine data, how to look at customer experience, how to look at more about predictiveness? Why is that element of chief data officer coming in? Was it not a wrapper around within the CDO role, and why is that being explicitly called out?
Well, so there's all sorts of interesting things in the data space and all sorts of interesting complexities, right? There's as you mentioned, there's the underlying technology of data, right? How do you deal with databases, big data solutions, machine learning, AI, all that kind of stuff, right? But there's also data management. How do you actually keep the data accurate, complete, manage the data? There's a whole process around data management that a lot of times the chief data officer will own and manage. And then we can take it one step further and talk about, well, what do you do with the data? How do you take data and turn it into information? How do you take information and turn it into insights, right? And so that's where you start to do some of the analytics. Maybe you bring in some data scientists that are actually going to mine and try to do something with that data, interpret the data, turn it into insights that your organization can use for decision making. Sometimes, and I'm going to throw another C-level role at you, sometimes that's a chief data officer that will be responsible for that. But for organizations that are big enough and have enough data, where data is really the lifeblood of the organization, they may even have another role called a chief analytics officer. Right, where they start to have conversations about, the analytics officer is really focused on, what are the insights? How are we going to collect and gather the insights? They leave the management of the data, the technology underpinning the data, to the chief data officer to figure all that out, and they focus on the insights. So a lot of different ways to do this.
You can have a lot of roles, and then come to the most important crux. How do they interface with the business? Again, you can have a lot of these different roles. You call a CTO, Chief Digital Officer, Data Officer, Analytic Officer. Now, how does business and the technology, the C-root roles that engage with technology work? Because in business relationship management, we talk about convergence. So if we're looking at convergence of business and IT, whatever be the roles that we are talking about, are we having a seat at the table with all these people that there is a constant understanding of business value rather than just looking at, oh, this is a cool new technology, let's make the best use of it and make it matter. So what is driving? Is it technology driving business outcomes, or the business value that is being asked by the business owners, the business units, driving these conversations?
That's a loaded question, Suresh. So to your point, so many of these roles that we talk about actually will cut across lines of business, right? And we have some of these roles in place to try to get scale in larger organizations around specific areas of expertise. And so this question around how we interact with, engage the business is critically important. We'll throw another couple of C-suite roles at you, right? The CEO, the Chief Executive Officer, the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. All of those folks have to be part of a digital transformation, because digital transformations are transforming the business model of the company. Those executives have to be at the table. And so it's a really, really important question when you talk about, and that's where I think we will, I'll throw it back to you to say, I think the role that becomes really important in that conversation is not a C-suite role. It's a B-suite role,
right?
The BRM. So you're the BRM expert. So tell us about BRMs.
So I'm glad that you brought this term called business relationship manager, because I think if you look at it, let me take a step back. Any organization today, we talk about industry 5.0. If we look at 4.0 and 5.0, this is all talking about a relationship-centered organization. Now, when you look at relationship-centered organization, it looks at your entire ecosystem, your suppliers, your third-party vendors, your internal employees. How are we going to make this successful, right? So if you are going to make something very successful, the most important question is that who is going to play the role of orchestrator? There are different moving parts, departments, functions across the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, there has to be one person who has to be an orchestrator who does end-to-end. I'll tell you a story that I still vividly remember. Steve Jobs was asked a question, because every time in San Francisco Bay Area, he used to come there and present a new product, and everybody will give a thunderous applause for a new product like Macintosh or iPod and iPhone. And one of his engineers went to Steve and said, Steve, this is unfair. We do all the hard work and you get all the name. And he looked at him and said that, you're right. I mean, you're all individually great musicians. You're a guitarist, you're a violinist, you're a lyricist. You're a part of my band, right? And I take pride in getting the best of people in. But I am the orchestrator, because only when you have orchestrator, you get symphony. Otherwise, you get cacophony. So the whole conduit or the glue with all these different roles is to have someone take that step and look at this end-to-end value chain. So we do talk about this one, Mike, in terms of IT for IT. Are looking at this in terms of value chains and value streams. That's going to be important, because if you need to run IT as a business and focus on business value, it's not just about technology that matter. They are important tenants, but the most important part is the relationship part of it. When I say relationship in terms of motivating your employees, your task force, giving people a purpose, understanding that you cannot do everything by yourself. You need to get some things from your supplier ecosystem, partner ecosystem. So how do you build an ammunition engine that will be self-sufficient in making this really a phenomenal success? So I believe that the role of business relationship management is going to be pivotal in looking at talking the language of the business, understanding how the supply and demand works, looking at which technology, which solutions will make the most sense, which I call as demand shaping, that will deliver the most important value to the customers and partners. Well, that's my take on that.
I couldn't agree more. So this was fun, Suresh, and I know we don't have any myths that we're going to bust here at the end, but this was a fun little conversation about all of the different C-suite roles and how they engage with technology and digital transformation. Well, thanks for the idea.
And I think it was fun because we were able to unearth things, and everything has got a merit, right? In all what we are talking about has a merit. It's a question of how do we leverage to an ecosystem that is much more meaningful. So these roles are really good, except that we need to make sure that we have a clear understanding of roles and responsibilities. More importantly, we all exist to drive and deliver business value. If that is in mind, I think that episode will make us justified that all these C-suite rules are all having one single-minded purpose, that we need to deliver business value. Otherwise, we get, and I tell this one more often as a fitting comment, right? It is between business and IT. Can business outsource IT or IT outsource business?
You're not going to be very successful if IT tries to outsource the business.
So in this predominance, if business is going to outsource, IT, then we all within the C-suite have a role to play to make sure that we are relevant to the business and we exist and sustain in the years ahead for any transformations today, tomorrow, and in the future. That's my final comment and closing. Thanks, Mike. Always a pleasure to have you with these kind of discussions, and I hope our viewers enjoyed today as well.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun, Suresh. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.